maybe this is what McLaren want. Maybe they've said a long time ago, nah, I'm not interested in the Drivers' Championship. Constructors' Championship is what it's all about. And we want to create noise and news in every race. And if our two drivers crash into one another periodically, that's okay, so long as we still win the Constructors' Championship. Don't care about the drivers, whether it's Lando or Oscar or whether it's Charles Leclerc, doesn't worry to us. Maybe they took that decision a long time ago. I very much doubt it, but that's what it looks like. I mean, how many people in the early days of their career went through the losses that he suffered and the way he's got through those. And I can't imagine what it was like for him on the podium yesterday. And that's why I had, watery eyes, because I was thinking about his dad. There's absolutely no way a teammate should have tried what Oscar did on Lando Norris if it was a team correctly managed. Again, I say, Oscar did that pass as if Lando was in a Ferrari or a Mercedes.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour. With me, as always, the goatiest F1 mind to have ever F1'd, the one they call Peter D. Windsor. How are you keeping, sir?
I'm very well, Cam. Yeah, come on, let's get over the intros. Enough of all this goat business.
It has to be done.
No, it's good. I mean, late night last night, obviously lots going on, lots of WhatsApping after I'd finished work on the video. And yeah, justifiably so. I mean, what a weekend, what a race, what a day, what a moment for Charles. And I'm still pretty high on it, to be honest. Just an amazing thing to have a Ferrari driver win at Monza is always big, but to have Charles Leclerc winning the race the way he did, extracting the absolute maximum from that car in every dimension. And sometimes extracting the maximum means being very kind to it and looking after it at certain times. So he just did it perfectly, judged it perfectly. It's great to have Charles back, as he was showing that the trends were in that direction, that Charles back as the Charles Leclerc we know and love.
He wasn't bad, was he, yesterday? Although, Peter, let me pitch the first question at you this way. I've had a lot of negative things to say about Charles Leclerc, not least his unforced errors, not being as assertive in his constructive challenge back to the pit crew as, let's say, a Carlos Sainz Jr. And many of my mates said, Cameron, on the back of yesterday's performance, Cameron, I told you that Charles Leclerc was the one and that you need to be more respectful of him. Peter, what springs to mind as far as Charles Leclerc's brilliant performance, fantastic for Formula One, a Ferrari driver, the next one winning Monza in it, like it's a brilliant story. But the phrase that springs to mind, Peter, not to be a Debbie Downer, is one swallow does not a summer make eth. Am I being too harsh on Charles Leclerc here? Does he need to do more going forward, or should we just celebrate the grandeur that was his victory yesterday?
Well, it's two swallows, isn't it? Because he drove pretty well at Zandvoort too, very well at Zandvoort, and he drove as well at Zandvoort actually as he did at Monza, I think, in many ways. And the defense, for Oscar Piastri not to beat him was pretty impressive if you think about it. No, I mean, Charles has always been an open book, and that's one of the endearing things about him, that he is very emotional. He's an emotional guy, and you're never going to take that out of him. And so you don't expect him to be the same on the radio as, say, Oscar Piastri is. He's always going to be Charles Leclerc, and he's always going to express his mind. And if they speak to him at the wrong minute, he's always going to tell them. A bit like Nigel Mansell, but he's an easy book to read. So you work with that. You don't try and change that. You don't try and work around it. You just work with it. And you know that when you say to Charles, run this brake balance spec in the middle of the lap when he's just about to go into Ascari or whatever it is, and he knows exactly what brake balance he wants, and he knows exactly what situation he's in, and he knows exactly how to look after the tires, it's no wonder he will snap back. And if he snaps back, that actually, as I said in the video last night, that should actually be a sign of reassurance back in the garage that, yeah, he knows what he's doing, and that's good old Charles. Obviously, as you correctly say, that emotion, and let's assume it's all emotion, even going back to that French Grand Prix shunt, is also a downside because it has led to unforced errors throughout his career. But I think we should all cut him slack in that because he's a Ferrari driver. And if you are at the top of your profession, which he is, he's right up there with Max and Lewis. And I've always said that virtually from the minute he stepped into a Formula 3 car, let alone F2 or F1. If you are at the top of your profession, Ferrari is and you are quite an emotional person, Ferrari is the most volatile environment in which to work. And there have been various pressures over the years, various team principals, various chief engineers. And he's, been pushed and pulled in his own mind. And he hasn't had the stability that you inevitably get. I say inevitably, you normally get from, dare I say it, a UK-based team, a Mercedes, a Red Bull, or a McLaren, where they run things in the sort of Ken Tyrrell-esque sort of way. And that sort of set the tone for how a Formula One team should be run. But Ferrari, to their credit, have never gone down that path. They've always been Ferrari. And it's often been a battle of, wills with Charles. And I say, that has resulted in unforced errors, making the same mistake 2 days in a row, all sorts of weird things. But he is an emotional front-running Grand Prix driver. Max is nothing like as emotional. Lewis is nothing like as emotional. But they've got other characteristics that maybe Charles doesn't have, and maybe Charles got some positive characteristics in his makeup, in his DNA. But in terms of technique, I mean, he's right up there, I would say. And I've always said that about Charles, and that's why I've got in my cupboard next door, I've got the autograph shirt from Charles when he clinched the Formula 3 championship.
Oh, oh.
Because I was a fan back then, and I'm a fan now, and good luck to him.
He's a brilliant driver, and I think this is why I've been quite harsh and discerning around those mistakes, Peter, because and again, Charles Fossey and the Tifosi will always be critical of me, but I think because he's so good, because he's so brilliant technically as far as his inputs, both steering, throttle, like he's an absolutely fantastic driver. It'd be disingenuous of me to argue that he's not the quickest point to point. But if he's to fulfill his not substantial potential, then my point is this: that he's got to improve. Yet and still, notwithstanding the brilliance that the tyre whisperer, that the showing that was the Italian Grand Prix yesterday, he's still got a way to go as far as his race management in real time, him being assertive, and ultimately trying to trend these unforced errors down to zero, which he has done to a large extent this year. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too harsh, Peter. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think you are, because he is his own man, and he's the sort of guy that, like Nigel, you can't really tell him what to do in or out of the car. He knows how to do it, and he's got some baggage, and it is emotional baggage. But again, cut him slack. I mean, how many people in the early days of their career went through the losses that he suffered, and the way he's got through those? And I can't imagine what it was like for him on the podium yesterday. And that's why I had, watery eyes, because I was thinking about his dad, to be honest. And I was thinking, there is absolutely no way Charles wouldn't have been thinking about his dad on the podium yesterday at Monza. And yet the smile was there. Of course it was there, but he was Charles Leclerc enjoying the moment. But at the same time, he's got all these terrible moments that he's had to live through and come through. And not many drivers have had to do that at such a young age, and he's done it beautifully well. So if he's got a few shortcomings, and they add up to sometimes going off the road, but at the same time, that emotion drives him into achievements like that of Zandvoort, where it was a race of defense, and that at Monza, where it was a race of management and controlled aggression, then so be it. That is the characteristic of Charles Leclerc. Let's face it, Tatiana Nuvolari had quite a lot of failings as well, probably, as did Achille Vazzi, as did Sterling Moss, as did, Sterling Moss was not interested in points in the championship, and he wanted to win races, wanted to drive for British teams. There's a lot of things you can say about a lot of drivers. They're characteristics. Nigel Mansell was a forceful guy that wouldn't really listen to anybody else. But you lived that, you worked with that, and you can do that. And that's why I keep saying Jock Clear's done a very good job at Ferrari, because Charles, for sure, is not an easy guy to manage and to work with. And yet Jock has got that out of him in a performance level that is just wonderful to watch. And good luck to them.
What was the genius of Charles Leclerc's drive yesterday? Was it in the tyre management? Was it in his pace? Was it in the ability to get past Lando early doors? What would you say were the one and two things that were the critical success pieces that managed to get him that fabled victory?
His early pace and the move on Lando coming out of the second chicane, just that opportune moment. Obviously, he'd seen what Piastri had done going into the second chicane, so he was kind of ready and alert anyway for that moment. And he got Lando there. And then not only did he get Lando, but then he just sat in the DRS of Oscar. And I thought that was a very telling 5, 10, 15 lap burst from Charles Leclerc of, I've got the DRS. I know I've got a top speed advantage anyway, and I've got DRS. I can look after the tires a little bit here. They're on mediums, and I can just sit and wait and watch. And Oscar spent a lot of time behind me. Now I'll spend a bit of time behind him, see if he's learned anything. That was probably going through his mind. And he was probably quite impressed with Oscar, I should think, at that stage of the race. But I would imagine he started to think, yeah, I can feel the left front going. This race is going to be all about the left front. He probably would have felt that about lap 10 or 11. And when his left front was going sooner than Oscar's. And at that moment, it was probably a good thing, because at that moment, his mindset would have been, right, this is a race of looking after the left front, and I can do this as well as anybody. If it's going to bring McLaren down, that's very good for us. And so yes, he did start to lose ground to Oscar when that left front went off and Lando got into his DRS, but he didn't give position to Lando. You know, that was very impressive. So Lando then kind of went off a bit and came into the pits for his tires. And then Charles, I think at that moment felt, yeah, I've got 3 or 4 laps left in this. I can do this, and I'm gonna stay in front of Lando. And immediately they brought him in and to cover Lando in a sort of established Formula One way, which I think was a mistake. And I think Charles was correct in saying, you know, that was a mistake. We shouldn't have done that, because I'd been nursing the tires. It's very difficult to explain all that on the radio, but I had been looking after the tires. I did have a couple of laps more in me, and I could have come out ahead of Lando. As it was, he was then behind Lando. And that was the moment, I think, when Charles didn't have to do very much, because he, at that moment on the hard tire, it was just like, okay, I'm on the hard tire for the rest of the race. We know the Ferrari is not going to be as good as the McLaren in terms of grip level and how the tires are going to go off. And there is going to be graining. I've got to just think about the end of the race and look after it. And to his astonishment, then he's got the 2 McLaren drivers racing each other, trading fastest laps, and basically destroying their left fronts. He couldn't believe it. And I'm sure he saw that, and he could see how quickly they were going. He knew what laps he was doing and how fast they were going. And he knew what his pace was relative to Oscar from that run in the mediums. And so he thought, right, you know, bring it on. You 2 guys, you can crash into one another, do whatever you like. And of course, they didn't crash into one another, but yeah, their left fronts went to the point where they had to come in again. And at that moment, that millisecond, it's not the first time Charles done that. As soon as somebody comes in, as we saw on the mediums, he wants to stay out because he knows he can look after the tires. And that's why he was annoyed in that first call. And so they kept him out. And this time he would have been on the radio saying, no, I'm staying out. I'm staying out. I can do this. I can do this. And so they let him do it. And he got on with it. And he's done that before. He did that in Hungary, I think. Was it last year or this year? I can't remember. It's last year, I think he did one of those. And so then it became, I'm going to look after this left front. And he knew he could. And there aren't many corners at Monza, let's face it. You know, for McLaren, the goodest car McLaren had to destroy their left fronts on a circuit that's got only 6 corners, 7 corners. Pretty, you know, poor showing, really, given the equipment they had. And then it became just Charles, you know, I've got to keep it in the 23s. Unbelievable consistency of the type we saw at Zandvoort when he was under pressure from Oscar. Unbelievable pace against looking after the tires. And if you're looking after the rears, if it's the left rear that's taking all the punishment, it's a more difficult thing, because these are big, heavy Formula One cars with a lot of power. But if it's the left front, and bear in mind, we're on the softest of the Pirelli range and the hard compound now, but if it's the left front, a driver like Charles can do a lot more than a driver like Lando Norris, in my opinion, because he's just more able to manipulate the car going into the corner and to make sure that he's taking as much load out of that left front as possible before the turn in, the rotation point. Oscar is sort of between Lando and Charles, but by no means in Charles' territory there. And that's what won Charles the race. And you saw how much Carlos Sainz dropped away from Charles. And that's the difference between Carlos and Charles when it's really short corners and manipulation of the car. And yeah, I would have thought Charles felt very comfortable from 15 laps to go in that race. No problem at all. And I bet he probably had a bit in hand as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I suppose this is his gift, and where I've got to heap some praise upon him, because he's being more assertive, particularly in his communication over the radio with his new race engineer, Brian Bozzi, than he has been in previous seasons, pushing back, telling them.
Well, you say that, Cameron, but we don't know, do we? Maybe Brian was saying, in, Charles, in, box, box, box. And maybe Charles was saying, what? I can't hear, radio's down. I've no idea. That bit wasn't out in public consumption, but probably that was the case, I would imagine. Or maybe at that point, Jock was elbowing Brian in the ribs, saying, no, don't even think about it, Brian.
I think I'm speaking specifically to, there was a couple of times when they asked him, can you make this engine mode change or this strap, whatever the change was on the radio, and he said, listen, mate, if you're asking me to do it on the first time, by the 10th time, if I haven't done it, mate, you might want to save your breath. Like he's much more, do you know what I mean? Much more assertive now.
Yeah, he is. That's definitely better. And you can tell he's got a good relationship with Brian, and he's not afraid to express his emotions to Brian, and Brian to stay calm and just to be the Brian that he should be. And that's a very good thing. And I would think a lot of that's come from Jock. And I know Jock was a big fan of Brian as well. So that's how that's working now, and it's working really well.
More props to Shaw, onwards and upwards. Let me ask you now then about the main event, Mr. Windsor, because McLaren, it felt like a cacophony of errors from them, from the papaya rules as they term them, to the entanglement, or the very near entanglement at the second chicane on the very first lap, courtesy of Oscar Piastri just being a racing driver, to how they managed it at the end, the team orders or lack thereof being that, I mean, it's a second place for Oscar Piastri, as you said in your review video. What really does it matter? Are McLaren blowing this driver's championship, Peter, by trying to be too nice, by deploying this this team ethos whereby we have two #1 drivers, and there's never a circumstance in which we can institute team orders and it be fair on both drivers? Are they being too nice as at September 2024?
Well, it's a long, complicated question that goes back, I think, to the days of Daniel Ricciardo, because the millisecond that Zak Brown decided that he would rather have Oscar Piastri than Daniel Ricciardo as a #2 support driver, or in the second car as an equal #1, whichever you perceive it to be, alongside Lando Norris, his chosen second adopted son, future world champion. That was the millisecond that Zak Brown basically said, and I'm going to put as much pressure as I can on Lando, and there are going to be no team orders, and that's how I'm going to get the best from Lando. And I said at the time, the minute I heard he was going to McLaren, I thought, well, that's great for Oscar, not very good for Alpine, and they didn't handle it very well. But this is terrible news for Lando Norris. And because if you got a Lando, you don't need an Oscar. You have a Ricciardo in the other car. If you got a Max, you have a Sergio in the other car. If you've got a Charles, you have a Carlos Sainz in the other car. If you've got a Lewis, you have a Bottas in the other car. And I think it's fair to say that if Daniel Ricciardo had not been sacked and had kept his drive at McLaren and was still in the McLaren and was driving for McLaren this year, I think Lando would be a minimum of 16 points ahead of where he is right now. And that's how many drivers' points it's cost Lando to have Oscar Piastri in the other car, as I predicted from day one. Now, none of this is the fault of Oscar Piastri, because he's as you say, he's a racing driver and he just did the move. It was right there, obviously, and nobody at McLaren had told him not to. So he went ahead and did it. But, you either decide to have a Lando Norris team and get the best from Lando in the way that Red Bull have done around Max Verstappen, or Ferrari did around Michael Schumacher, or Brabham did around Nelson Piquet. You can go back into history of the sport, or you can bring in two drivers that are going to be unbelievably closely matched and are always going to be taking points from one another, because this whole business of papaya rules, or Christian Horner, race hard but don't run into one another, it's complete and utter nonsense. What does that mean? Nobody's ever explained what that means, and nobody knows. The drivers don't know what that means. What does it mean? Race hard, but don't run into one another. Well, I'm racing hard. It's not my fault he moved over on me. Oh, I didn't see him there. You know, it's not my fault that he pulled out a move which I didn't expect. You know, what does racing hard mean? It's ludicrous. So you've got to have, if you want to have, I mean, Lando would have won that race yesterday if Daniel had been in the other car, for sure. He would have beaten Charles Leclerc. He wouldn't have lost the lead. He would have been in the lead of that race, and Charles would have been second, and Daniel probably would have been third, or maybe second, to give Daniel his due. But he certainly wouldn't have done what Oscar Piastri did. He wouldn't have been as quick as Piastri, and he certainly wouldn't have passed Lando going into the second chicane on the outside and putting Lando in a position on a narrow entry bit of road, which has always got a little bit of rubbish offline, into a position where he's got to give it more lock to give Oscar more room, and then he loses the back end, and he's in opposite lock going into the second chicane. I mean, that's not good. Maybe McLaren, I mean, here we got to say, full stop, new paragraph. Maybe this is what McLaren want. Maybe they've said a long time ago, nah, I'm not interested in the Drivers' Championship. Constructors' Championship is what it's all about. And we want to create noise and news in every race. And if our two drivers crash into one another periodically, that's okay, so long as we still win the Constructors' Championship. Don't care about the drivers, whether it's Lando or Oscar or whether it's Charles Leclerc, doesn't worry to us. Maybe they took that decision a long time ago. I very much doubt it. But that's what it looks like. That's what it looks like, that they've decided that as good as Lando is, they're going to crowd him with as much stuff as possible. As I said, they would the minute they signed Oscar Piastri, because Lando's vision was always Lando Norris, do things my way. This is the way the team works. This is the car. This is everything I love about McLaren. And in his peripheral was Daniel Ricciardo doing a nice job. Now, the minute they had Oscar, it's constantly not peripheral anymore. He's right there. He's sort of three-quarter front, both sides. And he's got to look at what Oscar's doing all the time. And that, of course, detracts from his own performance. And that's the problem. You know, the mistake was signing Oscar Piastri and not, or the mistake was re-signing Lando for his new long-term contract and not saying to Lando, you are definitive number one on the track. Don't worry about it. You'll always be the focus of our championship. They didn't do that either. Or Lando didn't insist on that, even more remarkably, to my mind, I guess because he never thought Oscar would be that big a deal. But I've said many times, you know, Oscar has shorter corners, and that's why his left front lasted a little bit longer than Lando's around Monza, because it was so tough on the left front with the graining. And there was nothing to do with, you know, we had Lando saying, I can't believe how I'm killing the left front. Well, it's because his corners are quite long. That's the one drawback he has in his incredible repertoire of style. You know, I've gone on about how supple his inputs are, how good he is, and how he has this wonderful thing on one lap where he can just come out of the throttle and the brakes, and he lets the car settle at much higher speed than you would normally go into a medium high-speed corner, which Max did in the wet into Pouin for his pole lap in the Belgian Grand Prix. That's an incredible ability to have, but it doesn't last more than a lap. That ability does not work within the variables of a race situation, crosswind or graining left front or oil or whatever it is on the track. That's when you need proper throttle footwork and handwork manipulation of the car. And Lando is a sort of super supple version of Carlos Sainz with slightly shorter corners than Carlos, but not even as short as Oscar Piastri. Oscar's a bit harsher than Charles at the moment, but he definitely, you know, can look after the left front more effectively than Lando. And we saw that yesterday. And that's a problem for Lando going on, because there will be other situations like that when Oscar's ability comes to the surface again. On other circuits, as I said, at Zandvoort, not many corners at Zandvoort where a guy like Charles or Lewis or Max can do anything exceptional with the left front or with the car in general, because they're sort of line lock, funny corners and bank corners. But Monza, you know, through the Lesmos, through the Parabolica, there's some serious places where you can do a lot of really good front tire management.
100%, and some really, really quick combined entries and exits, as did Lando in qualifying on his pole lap through, as you'd alluded to, Lesmo 1 and Lesmo 2. He was gangbusters, Peter, and I think this makes the bitter pill of what happened in the Italian Grand Prix, particularly towards the latter stages, makes so many people, F1 fans and the community more broadly, lose their absolute mind. Peter Buxton on the F1 broadcast was like, McLaren have something very rare as far as an opportunity in their grasps. That is a championship, both constructors and drivers, and they're blowing it through their inaction. To which, and I lost my mind after the race yesterday, Peter, because I want to see the leveling of the competitive landscape. I would love to see a championship being competed for by Max and Lando through to the end of the, like, a finale like we got in 2021. But McLaren are blowing it, aren't they, Peter? It's a,
As I say, it's 16 points now that Lando could have had he won Hungary and had he won the Italian Grand Prix. And I'm being kind at the moment because I'm not including Spa in that.
Yeah.
But don't forget, the reason he ran wide out of La Source on the first corner, who was inside him?
Oh my God, you did say.
Exactly,
You did say,
and if that had been, again, if Daniel Ricciardo had been his teammate, then Hungary would never have happened. And I don't think Lando then would have gone off on the outside of La Source on the first lap of the Belgian Grand Prix, purely because Daniel was to his right. He would have thought, oh, it's Daniel, no problem, and just kept going. And that's the point. When the minute you put two very, very quick drivers alongside one another in a good car. I've said before, remember I used to say about Mercedes, it's a good job that for Toto Wolff, in a way, that the Mercedes is so bad in 2022 and 23, because if it was a championship contending car, it would have been unbelievable aggro between Lewis and George Russell.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And we've seen touches of it already, but but as I say, the good luck for Toto in some ways, ironically, is that the car wasn't good enough. But when the car is a championship contender and you've got two guys capable of getting the best from it, that's when you've got to be really, really strong with your management. And it's as if McLaren, we saw that, I criticized the hell out of them after the Hungarian Grand Prix for the decision they took pre-race, that if one driver had to stop early to cover an opponent, that position would have to be given back. And I've said a million times, that's far too complicated a move to action in the middle of a race. There are far too many variables involved in pit stops, in and out laps. And yet they went ahead with it. And you could see Lando. That was a definitive moment when Lando was in the lead of the Hungarian Grand Prix, and they were saying, "Come on, Lando, you know what we agreed, benefit of the championship." Blah, blah, blah. And Lando's saying, "Oh, yeah, but tell him to catch up with me," and things like that, all going through his head, all of which should have been talked about in the debrief before the race. Sorry, the pre-brief, and obviously weren't. I don't know what's going on at McLaren. Who's running it? Who's coming up or not coming up with the rules and regulations of how to run the two drivers? Because it needs to go back to the original thought of why we need Oscar Piastri in the team. Is it because we didn't think Lando was good enough to do the whole thing on his own with Daniel Ricciardo as his teammate? Or is it because we don't really care about the Drivers' Championship and all we want is the two fastest drivers we can get? We need to go back to that point, what was in the mind of Zak Brown, before you can then make any judgment about what they're doing now. Yeah. It's no good saying, "Oh, isn't it mega?" It's, this is Prost Senna all over again. Well, very different days then. They had a car that was demonstrably quicker than any other car on the grid by a factor of about 2 seconds a lap. And so, yeah, one of them was going to win the championship and the team was going to win the constructors. So it's a totally different situation. You can't even compare it with that. So, we need to know what is the reason for signing Oscar in the first place and firing Daniel Ricciardo.
Yeah, agreed. What do you say, Peter? Because I can hear the F1 community already in the background saying, "Cameron, stop being an F1 snowflake." What do you watch F1 for if it's not rancor and friction and drama and fighting between teammates, and Oscar and Lando in the cool-down room not talking to each other, barely looking each other in their eyes, like averting their gaze? What is F1? I hear many people say, if not this, fighting between teammates, fighting between the best 20 drivers in the best 20 machines around the best 20 circuits in the world, or best 24 even. What do you say to people that say that, Peter, that we should just let them fight, right? Team orders be damned. McLaren are doing the right thing, and this is their heritage, that going back to the days of Ron Dennis, that he would happily burn a drivers' championship, as he did very famously in 2007, at the altar of competitiveness and equal rights within a team.
Well, I say, look at some of Lewis Hamilton's greatest Grand Prix wins. Look at some of Michael Schumacher's greatest Grand Prix wins. Look at some of Niki Lauda's greatest Grand Prix wins. These are not wins that should be undervalued and have done any done any damage to the reputation of the sport. It's quite a puerile attitude to say we want lots of crashes between teammates and lots of fights and lots of arguments. I mean, that's almost going down the sort of Netflix route, isn't it? I can only really speak for myself. And what captivated me about Formula One when I was a kid was Jim Clark winning the 65 French Grand Prix by almost a lap, half a lap from Jackie Stewart, and walking away with the race in a race example of pure poetry. That's what I love about Formula One. Now, I was at Williams and I was working at Williams when we had Nigel Mansell against Nelson Piquet. And I was on tenterhooks every race when those two were out there racing one another. But I'll tell you one thing, they never got in a situation where one of them did something unexpectedly stupid or unexpectedly aggressively. You could argue that the pass on Nelson in the 87 British Grand Prix was well, I don't even, you can say that was over aggressive. That was just a beautiful pass. And even Nelson would say that. And there was a difference in tires at that point, and it was kind of logical in a way. But it really doesn't matter ultimately what the Formula One world out there thinks. The only thing that matters is what the team wants and how the team is running its two drivers. And in the case of Williams, Frank quite clearly believed that Nelson Piquet was the number one driver and Nigel Mansell was the number two, and that Nigel was free to race as a number two and was never going to compromise his ability on track. All he was going to do was give the number one driver a better engine, use of the spare car, and all the new bits that came out of the factory, all the upgrades, that all went to Nelson Piquet. And at least there was some clarity of where we stood. And when Sterling Moss was taking it to Fangio in the Mercedes team, at least there was clarity of what it was all about. It was at that point, Fangio, what was he, the 3 times world champion, or the twice world champion, I guess, by then, and Sterling Moss, the young British pretender. And everybody kind of knew what it was all about. And Fangio, in his very graceful way, allowed Sterling to race very near him, but they were never over aggressive and compromising the team in any way. What we have at McLaren, however, is complete confusion, because we had a great stable team. It was Lando Norris, Daniel Ricciardo. Then they brought Oscar Piastri in for unexplained reasons other than we just assume they think he's quicker. But there's no explanation of how they're going to run the team when Lando and Oscar are fighting for the same piece of road. It's a completely different situation to most of those we've seen. Now, you could argue, isn't it great to see that Lando is not giving any eye contact to Oscar in the green room? But what does that mean? It doesn't actually solve anything, and all it is just an observation. Yeah, you know, I'd be just as interested to see the debrief at Red Bull on Monday with Max saying, okay, guys, what is going on with the car? Isn't that just as dramatic? It's just that we don't see that. We do see the green room. So there's lots of that going on. And I've always said that the down moments, the black moments in any team are much more compelling television than the cheering and the clapping and the spraying of the champagne. I'd much rather see that. You know, you watch the Wimbledon final, and every time there's a winning point, the cameras always go to the winning team behind that player rather than the team of the player has just lost the point, because the directors, in a rather, again, puerile way, think that we want to see this guy, we want to see all this stuff. You never see the downside, but we do see it in that green room. I think so let's put it all into context. Every team would have had horrendous moments after the Italian Grand Prix, apart from Ferrari. And let's see all those moments. You're touching on something I've often talked about. You know, we should be seeing the moments of the helmet slamming in the debriefs. We should be seeing the engineers, you know, absolutely at a loss as to what to do next and how the driver reacts to that. That's part of Formula One. And yeah, I agree with all that, but it doesn't have to be two drivers crashing into one another and ruining the race of one who's in championship contention. It doesn't have to be that. It can be a million other things if you want to start bringing in all the drama of Formula One. Bring it on. As I've always said, get the GoPro cameras in the road cars, get all the drivers' briefings filmed live. Well, let's have all that stuff. I agree. But I don't agree with compromising the race of somebody as good as Lando Norris after the pole that he's just got in a car as good as the McLaren. That's what I don't like.
Peter, it's very techie, this. I agree with you, Peter. I don't like it either. This isn't me saying that Lando Norris is perfect, right? Because that's something like the 6th or 7th race running where he's qualified on pole and again fails to make it to the end of the first lap in first position. So he
Well, at least he
was,
made the first corner, two corners.
yeah, true. But then Peter, even with that, right, the second chicane isn't traditionally a place at Monza that you would even overtake around. So like what? I think this speaks, there's something in Lando that he needs to fix for. I don't know whether it's mental fortitude. I don't know whether he goes to sleep at critical times. But there's so I don't think
I don't think Lando. I don't think Lando made any mistake at all. He'd got through the first corner. He'd made a good start. Oscar had had his thing with George Russell. You know, he was clear, and he comes into the second chicane. Nothing's up to temperature yet completely. He's on a full load of fuel. It's a very narrow braking area there. What do? You brake a bit early, and you just, your teammate's behind you, and he's not going to do anything stupid. You go in and you get all you're thinking about is the exit of the second chicane. Nice clean exit, and get a good run into the Lesmos. That's all he's thinking about. Just get the car stopped and get in and out of the chicane. And there's absolutely no way a teammate should have tried what Oscar did on Lando Norris if it was a team correctly managed. Again, I say, Oscar did that pass as if Lando was in a Ferrari or a Mercedes. That's the point. And you can't really blame him if nobody at McLaren has said to him, by the way, Oscar, if Lando makes a good start, let's just take it easy on the opening lap. That second chicane can be very dodgy for example, and just let him go, and we can sort out how we're going to go with the pit stops and later in the race. You're not going to win this race on the second corner. Did anybody say that to him? I don't know. Bearing in mind how aggressive Oscar is and how much of a racer he is, you'd imagine that they would be. They must know that by now. You'd imagine the penny would have dropped. But it looks as if nobody at McLaren is saying those things to him, which I find absolutely astonishing.
So doesn't Lando then, Peter, need to take some responsibility? And again, this is
here's another point. It's interesting, isn't it, that he's managed by Mark, and Mark went through this whole thing with Sebastian Vettel. Maybe Mark is making his mark on Lando on how to race your teammate in this situation, and maybe we're seeing now Oscar doing a few things that maybe Mark wishes he'd done when he was actually complying dutifully to the Red Bull rules. Maybe there's a bit of that. I don't know. I mean, that's just a guess. Mark was an unbelievable teammate actually to Sebastian Vettel when you think about it, because he was often as quick, if not quicker, on many occasions, and yet quite often, he had to sit back and be the dutiful teammate, and he did that for the benefit of the team. Always, he's a massive team player, but maybe now you're seeing some of in Oscar, we'll play it how it should be.
And the word on the F1 curb, Mr. Windsor, is that potentially Mark Webber, the reason why it's all the papaya rules and they're handling Oscar with kid gloves is because there is a line or two in his contract that speaks to the point that you just make so eloquently, that McLaren can't treat Oscar Piastri as Red Bull treated Mark Webber around.
I'm sure that's the case. Mark for sure would have gone for that, and no surprise at all there. The shock is that McLaren would have accepted that on behalf of Lando Norris, because it's not McLaren really accepting it. It's telling Lando to accept it. And that's presumably why when he renewed, it's still, the jury's out as to why Lando did renew when he did on such a long-term contract, because he's a star driver. You could imagine potentially he might have been on Ferrari's list. He would be on Mercedes' list for sure. And he'd certainly be, on Red Bull's list. And I imagine he's the sort of driver that Max would have accepted at Red Bull because he's got a brain and he's a nice guy and he drives well.
Yeah,
he'd be a perfect second driver, other driver at Red Bull to Max Verstappen.
And apparently he was top of that list. But I just want to go back very quickly, Peter, to this Lando Norris thing, because as brilliant as a driver as I think he is, I think yesterday the second chicane, I feel like I agree with everything that you said, that Oscar Piastri raced Lando in that second chicane as if he was racing a red car or the silver car of Mercedes, and there's something to be said for that. However, is there not also something to be said for Lando being a tad naive as a peddler, racing Oscar Piastri as if he's racing, I don't know, somebody very benign, as if he's racing a Pierre Gasly. Oscar Piastri is nothing if not a killer in a car, the likes of which very similar to a George Russell. And he was always, if you go so conservative on your braking into the second chicane, Oscar's he's a shark and that's blood, and he almost like a moth to a flame. Oscar Jackie's always going to put a wheel up there and try and secure himself a
Oh, he
25
is.
point.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say Pierre Gasly was benign. I think
Yeah.
there's probably not a good example. I mean, somebody like Bottas would be better, probably. I think Pierre Gasly's got quite a lot of fire in his blood. Um, no, but I think, again, I blame Hungary because for sure after Hungary, when the dust had settled, whoever is the main man at McLaren these days, I've no idea. I say that because it looks like there's nobody saying these things, but let's just assume somebody would have said to Lando, "Good job. What you did today was you'll get that back in spades. We'll look after you, and if you've got a chance in the championship, this will all work in your direction and in your favor. Thank you very much, Lando." For sure, that conversation would have happened. And do you not think, therefore, that once he got through turn one at Monza, he would have been thinking, pole, leading the race now, made a decent start, got that behind me. Second chicane, exactly what I said, second chicane, break a bit early, focus on the exit. That's for sure what he would have been thinking. He wouldn't have been thinking, looking in his mirrors, oh, there's Piastri, which side's he going to be? He wouldn't have been thinking that at all. He would have been thinking, we did Hungary, I gave him the win in Hungary, now let's just take it easy.
Yeah, yeah,
That's what he
100%.
would have thought. And that's because of what happened in Hungary. And if he hadn't obeyed team orders, and if he had won the Hungarian Grand Prix, for sure, he would have been looking in his mirrors a lot more and would have been defending a lot more when Piastri was right behind him going into the second chicane, which would have been a much better thing from Lando's point of view. He would have just blocked him and that would have got through.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's where it all started in Hungary. When you start playing around with fire in the way they did in Hungary, it comes back to bite you, as I said at the time. And it is coming back to bite them. It came back to bite them at Spa with Lando running wide at La Source. And now it's come back to bite them here. And it's points. It's 16 points, basically. It's gone. Maybe more if you want to add Spa. Let's call it 20 points that have gone. You could argue maybe Max is going to win the championship by more than 20 points. But right now, if you were McLaren, if you're Lando Norris, certainly you'd want 20 points in the bank, wouldn't you?
Just a tad.
How hard do you have to work to earn 20 points these days in Formula One?
Oh, mate, just a tad. And
that's going back P2 and a faster lap, isn't it? Something like that.
Yeah, just a tad. And going back to the point that you made the last time we talked, Peter, that where Carlos was telling Gilles that every point matters for Pete.
Of course,
like,
does.
what are you?
Well, it's not so much that. Don't ever trade points for the future because you never know what's going to be in the future. Every point is gold. Every point is worth whatever it is in gold and the current value of dollars in gold. And you never, ever play around with them. And there's 16 points that are just gone into the wind. And more importantly, maybe from McLaren's point of view, a win at Monza. They should have won that race easily. They should never have made a two-stop strategy. They should the minute they got to 1-2, it should have been right. Look after the left front. Charles will be stacked up behind. We'll tell you what's going on there. Just look after the left front, cruise around, don't race one another. And whatever they want, they've still got that problem to solve. Obviously, maybe that's why they wanted him to come in, hoping that the pit stops would sort out if Lando could get the lead or not. But that's when the race should have been under control for McLaren. One-stop strategy, win the race like that, no problem. It's easy. The car was good enough to do that. Piastri was driving well enough to do that, and Lando would have been second probably because of what happened in the second chicane, and that should have been a 1-2 for McLaren.
God help McLaren if Lando loses the championship
by less than 20 points. Oof.
And it would be the first time in F1 that something like that has happened, right, Peter? It's
no.
Unbelievable.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that as a counter to that you could argue two of the worst races Max has had in a long time with the Dutch and the Italian Grand Prix. And on both occasions, there was this sort of weird champion's momentum that nonetheless sort of runs behind him, just behind him, boiling up. At Zandvoort, it was finishing second in the end. Brilliant race of defense. And at Monza, it was, okay, I had a long pit stop, was at 6.2, lost 4 seconds in the pit stop, lost I don't know how many seconds running around at 317 clicks instead of, 10 kilometers an hour quicker when they had the clipping problem with the engine. And yet still, his main rival only finished third. It's
bonkers.
incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, they're massive missed
Because imagine if
opportunity.
Lando won that race, that would have been a big jump for him in points relative to Max. And that's another thing, Max on a terrible day still managed to keep the point. He only lost, I think, to Lando, only lost something like 8 points, right?
Yeah. Winner's mentality. Damage limitation is the assignment that Max Verstappen has accepted very gracefully, and he's doing fairly well on it. But just to make the final point, to bookend McLaren, Peter, it feels like they're too busy fighting these microcosm battles, failing to realise that there is a war over here that's being lost as far as the Drivers' Championship in it. And quite frankly, as a lifelong F1 fan, it's almost tragic. It's upsetting that this brilliant team that's McLaren.
Yeah, but don't be. Maybe Zach. We've never asked him. Maybe Sterling Moss is Zach's all-time hero. I mean, he does care about the history of the sport. He does care about the past. And maybe it's Sterling Moss. Maybe it's the ethos of Sterling Moss. Not interested in the championship. Every race is the only thing that matters. I want to win every race. Don't care about the points. Sterling never won a Drivers' Championship as a result. That's probably a good thing because he's remembered as one of the greatest driver never to win the Drivers' Championship.
Yeah.
And in the same way, you remember Chris Amon as the greatest driver never to win a race. And maybe Zach's just saying, I don't care about the Drivers' Championship. Constructors, and let's have a massive battle between our two drivers in every race. Don't care about the points. Maybe that's Zach's philosophy, in which case we should all sit back and enjoy it. But if that's the case, let us know, and we will sit back and enjoy it. We won't worry about the championship anymore, Zach, okay? And by the way, did you tell Lando that?
And that's fine, right, Peter? But the goalposts have should have shifted as far as their strategic priorities. Now that we're like 9-8 races away from the end of the season, there is, again, the racing gods have been very kind to McLaren. They've built themselves the quickest car ostensibly on the grid, and they have this opportunity in their hand that is Lando Norris potentially winning the Drivers' Championship. All of a sudden, it's not something that they baked into their automotive forecast per se, but it's happened, and that's the circumstance. Those are the cards that they're being dealt, but they're not moving accordingly. They're not behaving or making the big
they're not,
boy decisions.
and they're making life. Of course, they're making life worse now because having tasted the adrenaline rush of having experienced the adrenaline rush of passing Lando Norris into the second chicane and taking the lead of the Italian Grand Prix and basically dominating the Italian Grand Prix until the tires went off. Got to do something about the car, even though they were pushing it much too hard mid-race or after that pit stop. Imagine now if McLaren have a great car again in Baku, which they probably will, and Oscar's leading Lando by 5 seconds and Lando's 3 seconds ahead of George Russell. And the message comes out to Oscar Piastri. Oscar, can you slow down, please, and let Lando pass? You think he's going to want to do that? He's going to think, no, should have won the Belgian Grand Prix, should have won the Italian Grand Prix. No, sorry, radio problem.
Yeah. No chance. Oscar doesn't have that.
The more Oscar's leading Grand Prix and knowing that he's as quick as anybody out there in his own mind, the less he's going to want to, obey team orders to let Lando win.
Oh, Peter, what are we doing? What are we doing?
Just one thing. Well, as I say, it began the millisecond they decided they wanted Oscar Piastri instead of Daniel Ricciardo. And Daniel Ricciardo, a very, very good teammate to Lando Norris. Let's not forget that. In the same way that Carlos Sainz has been a great teammate to Charles Leclerc, in the same way that Sergio Perez has been a great teammate to Max Verstappen. And any argument against what I've just said there is completely nullified by the results of Max and Charles, and indeed how well Lando drove when he had Ricciardo alongside him. And the same goes for Lewis with Bottas.
Yeah.
I think Lewis would have had a better period at Mercedes post Abu Dhabi 21 if Bottas had been in the other car. I think Lewis has had more to worry about than he should have because of the George Russell factor. Not decrying George, he's super quick.
He's brilliant. He's brilliant.
The only other thing that's interesting, one thing that's interesting is that didn't Antonelli do exactly the same thing to Oliver Behrman going into the second chicane in the F2 race?
Yeah.
I think he did. Maybe Oscar was watching. Maybe they're mates, and Oscar was watching. Oh, yeah, there's a trick, mate. Yeah, get on with that one. Yeah.
Let's go. Speaking of which, Peter, it feels like the biggest story this weekend, aside from the aforementioned McLaren spat, was Andrea Kimi Antonelli. His speed over the course of the couple of laps that he did manage to get in before we yeeted it into the barrier at Parabolica, worthy of mention. What did you make of that whole debacle and Liberty Media desperately trying to push Andrea Kimi Antonelli down all of our necks? And did you take from it what much of the F1 media did, that this dude absolutely has the pace to make it as a Hall of Famer in Formula One over the next couple of years?
I think he has the pace. I didn't think that because of what he did at Monza. I mean, what he did at Monza was put the car in the wall 10 minutes into FP1, and any speeds he had recorded at that point were irrelevant because half the field weren't even out of the pit lane. So I don't know what that was all about. I've said ever since Monaco this year, he is definitely a short corner driver. He's got a feel for that. And he's obviously got the manipulation factors in there to allow him to do that. So he's very good. And you can see that even when he's racing closely against a lot of the guys in F2, Behrman particularly, you could see how early he was going into most corners and how good he was. I think the only thing that matters is why he crashed the way he did, which basically comes under the heading of having no feel for the car whatsoever going into the Parabolica and going in miles too quickly. And that's a question mark in my mind, because any future Ayrton Senna stroke Max Verstappen stroke Lewis Hamilton should never be in a situation where they have no feel for the grip of the car, the feel of the car, especially at the beginning of FP1 when the track's still green. I mean, none of it looked good. And that's the only thing we should be talking about from FP1, Antonelli, is why he crashed like that. No, you can't look at speeds. I mean, there's a bit of talk out there, I think, on the internet about minimum speeds and how high his minimum speeds were. But that's normally a bad thing when you're looking at short corner drivers with great manipulation. Most of them have got very, very low minimum speeds. Max's minimum speeds have never been anything to write home about. So anybody who's eulogizing about Antonelli's high minimum speeds either doesn't know what they're looking at or is, I don't know, putting out a smokescreen of rubbish, because it doesn't make any sense at all. What you want is low minimum speeds in general, particularly around Monza. Anyway, getting back to the point, I think on that FP1, he was a victim of being an Italian in Italy, having his first proper outing, real proper outing in a race car, as distinct from just going out on a Friday or running one of the old cars or whatever it was. And it all went ahead to him. So it went to his head. So it wasn't very well managed, was it? He wasn't very well structured when he got in the car. Why did they have the soft tires on his car? I don't understand that either. I mean, the Carlos Reutemann rule of learning how to be quick in Formula One, absolutely always go out on the hardest tires you can when the track's green and let the track come to you, and then run the soft tire right at the end. You learn to drive because you've got no temptation then to want to overstress the car. You're just feeling the road all the time. So they put him on soft tires at the beginning of FP1. I know they were on Max and a few others, but that was for a different reason, because they were planning what tires they're going to run throughout the weekend. In terms of Antonelli, what was that all about? I just couldn't get that at all. I suppose somebody in a rather basic way said, oh, well, he's a rookie, let's give him as much grip as we can, which is about the worst thing you can do for a young Italian in Italy. So, all adds up to being no surprise that he went off. I do think he has an abnormally great talent, absolutely, for sure. You can see that in the softness of his entries and his early turn in and the way he gets the car rotated. And I just hope that he's properly managed and they bring that out in him, because when he went off, actually on the corner where he went off in the Parabolica, he didn't do any of the things I've just described. He was way over on the left in sort of Carlos Sainz territory, somewhere between Lecco and the Swiss border, and leaning on the car like this, going in, obviously too quickly anyway, and with no ability, therefore, he hadn't set up any sort of stable platform from which to manipulate the car if there was any movement. And he just went straight off, sort of, as you do it. He went off like a very reflexy long corner, break in a straight line Merchant does, and that's not good. That wasn't good. So that, to me, because he's got so much raw talent, there's a warning sign there that it's not being correctly managed by Mercedes, and they're not getting the best from him at the right rate at the right time. But
Wow.
Don't read too much into minimum speeds. This is something that's very misleading in the graphics they put up there, and there was a lot of talk about all that. And if his minimum speeds were high, then that's the reason he went off. in my
Wow.
opinion. And somebody at Mercedes should have been saying, whoa, hang on, his minimum speeds are too high here, bring him in or put him on some hard tires or whatever, because that's a warning sign when you see that, because all that means is he's going in late and getting the power on early and leaving absolutely no ability, no time for manipulating the car in the way a Max does or a Lewis does. And it's
Wow.
astonishing, isn't it, really? Because he's got Lewis there to look at. He's had Lewis there to look at for what, at least a year, if not more, pretty closely, more than you or I are able to look
Mm.
at Lewis as what he's doing and maybe chat to him periodically. And I can't imagine Lewis would have been particularly helpful in terms of giving away a lot of
Mm.
stuff. And anyway, as I've said before, a Lewis or a Max doesn't really describe what they're doing anyway. They just get
True.
in and drive the car. But you'd
Yeah.
think Antonelli would have learnt a little bit from that. But I guess obviously not is the other message I would get from that shunt. He obviously hasn't been learning anything from Lewis at all. He's probably been looking at George's stuff. And he had, it doesn't look as if he's a George Russell type driver. George is very, very at and center in the way he drives, in my opinion. And Antonelli is more in the Lewis mold, more, as I said, short corners.
Yeah.
But then if Antonelli tries to look at what George is doing, it's only going to confuse him. And I presume they know all that at Mercedes. They must do, because they're masters of the universe, are they not?
Brilliant, Mr. Windsor. I've never seen a more coordinated PR drive around a single driver. The contrast optically was stark when you've got Lewis Hamilton on one side of the garage, set to join the Tifosi next year, 7-time champion, absolutely going to be on the Mount Rushmore of Formula One by the time he finishes. No one taking pictures around him. Kimi Antonelli on the other side of the garage. It looked like the world's press and media were in attendance around that, and I think that his lap was a function of that, Peter. I feel like
probably was. I mean, that's
100%.
a function of it's a function of just I got to go for it. Wow, I'm really quick. I'm purple. I was P1 after 5 minutes. Isn't this great? It's just pathetic. But are you telling me there were more cameras around him than there were around the real Kimi?
Well, yeah, Kimi did get a bit of press and media attention, didn't he? But
the real Kimi looked like a dude, didn't he? Just turning up the white T-shirt, the black sunglasses. It just looked fabulous. I mean, that's how a racing driver should be, in my opinion. I don't say Antonelli stuff. It's ridiculous.
He's a proper one, Kimi.
And all this talk about it, I should have to remind everybody, didn't Oliver Behrman pass him on the outside of Mirabeau in the Formula 2 race at Monaco this year? I don't remember Ayrton Senna getting passed on the outside of Mirabeau ever.
Yeah, he did.
And all I'm saying is let's keep things calm, because the guy has a massive amount of talent. But if you start doing all this PR stuff, and I haven't been exposed to any of it because I don't really listen or watch any of it that comes out of the teams like that, so it doesn't worry me at all. But from what you're saying, there's been a lot of ridiculous focus. I'm assuming then that there's been as much focus around Leo Bonaroli because of what he did in the Formula 3 race. I mean, that was absolutely unbelievable. It's the last lap of the Drivers' Championship. The Drivers' Championship's in the balance, and he passes Christian Mansell on the inside of the parabolica to win the championship.
Unbelievable.
Absolutely superb. As it happened, I don't think he needed to do it because poor old Gabriele Mini got disqualified. He finished second, but he got disqualified for the tires being under pressure. But what a move. And what I like about Leo, we should be talking about him. He doesn't have any affinity with any Formula One team, as far as I can make it out at the moment. He probably will. They'll all probably start, oh, yeah, we should get this guy now. And that's probably why he's so good. And he drives so well. And he's just a low-key guy that gets out there and races hard. I love watching Leo drive. And there's a message there. He's not one of these ridiculous academy drivers. No. And I was talking to Luke Browning a year ago, who's very quick and very talented. And at that point, he was a McLaren academy driver. And he was wondering whether, to continue with McLaren or maybe go with Williams. And I was looking at him thinking, why is he worrying about that? If I was Luke Browning, I wouldn't have any affinity with any Formula One team. I would just get on and do my own thing and win as many races as I possibly can. These academies aren't going to help me. They're probably going to hurt me if you look at the track record of most of them. Wow. And sure enough, he went to Williams and he hasn't had a great year. I'm not saying it's all that. I mean, maybe his car, he was with High Tech. It's a pretty good team. And I'm just saying these academy things and the way Mercedes have handled Antonelli is, well, it's just it's not worrying. It's just, it's just odd, really, that they should not be on top of those high minimum speeds and get him to be who he can really be, the guy with the low minimum speeds and
Yeah.
the fabulous transition mid corner and the great entries and exits. That's what he is. That's what Antonelli is, and he definitely has that talent. I'd put him right up there with certainly with Piastri in terms of that raw
Oof.
talent and that ability to rotate the car at the right moment. But he lost all that. He lost all of that in that 10 minutes of FP1. Mercedes allowed him to do that. That's the astonishing thing.
I think they set him up to do that directly, Peter, as a function of all of the aforementioned press and media. He's got the world of, like, every photographer and their grandma is outside of his garage before he leaves. They've done the bloody press tour. There's another video on Sky Sports F1 edited with beautiful
I don't want to
Italian
hear any
guitar
more of this,
music.
Cameron. I'm starting to pass the sick bucket, please. When you talk about grandmas in the back of the garage, I've got to remember. I think it was '91 when Riccardo Patrese spun in the semi-wet and blew his chance of winning the Italian Grand Prix. And when he came back to the garage, his mum started whacking him over the head with an umbrella. That was brilliant. That's what grandmas or mums or grandmas should do in Italy.
Oh dear.
I hope Antonelli got a whack over the head with an umbrella too when he came back after he shunned at the
It was
parabolic.
naughty, but I think it's Toto, Peter, as you alluded to. He deserves the whack over the head more than Kimi Antonelli, because by building it up this way, they've almost set up a dude who's just turned 18 years old that week. They've set him up for failure, right?
In fairness to Toto, I know he was a half reasonable racing driver. Didn't he finish third, I think, in a race in Bahrain once, a GT race or something? But, you don't expect Toto to be on top necessarily. He's got a lot of other things to worry about, like, cyber currency companies that go under and, internet security firms that have massive issues. No, he's got enough to worry about, just keeping that team on the straight and narrow financially and everything else, without having to worry about the details of Antonelli's driving. That should be whoever's running the Mercedes Academy should be massively on top of that. And they're not. Quite clearly, they're not, and that's a big one. That's why I had a bit of a rant about academies in general, because I don't think they do actually spend a lot of time on the things that are really important, like one, raising money for the driver, and two, making sure you get the best from his talent, whether he's a long corner driver, short corner driver, whatever he is. You need to massage that talent in the correct direction, and they're not doing that with Antonelli quite clearly, as we saw from the Parabolica. But I'd like to give a shout out here, if I may, on that subject to Williams, because I think they've done a very good job in raising money around Franco to get him into that car. And it's not family money. It's good money from Argentina, which is a real surprise given the state of their economy, to be honest. But there is some money there coming from Argentina behind Colapinto. And I think that's a good thing. And I've always said, amongst all my other bête noirs, like we should have classic circuits built in the middle of the desert, we should have GoPro cameras in the road cars. I've always said that a true driver academy is an academy that works with the driver around raising sponsorship for his feeder series and then into Formula One. Even if they're in conflict with the Grand Prix team, that's what they should be doing. That's the most difficult thing a young driver has to face, is how to raise the money for next year's budget. And if they're going to have an academy deal, let the Formula One team open its doors to all its marketing facilities to enable the driver and his little team to go out and benefit from that. And it looks on the face of it as if that's what Williams have done with Colapinto. So if that is the case, I'd take my hat off to Williams and the marketing department there, because they've obviously done a very good job to build up a package around Colapinto, who's a very talented, great driver, young driver. I mean, there's a lot of very good young drivers out there, and it'll be interesting to see how that all settles down. I mean, Gabriel Bortoleto has got Fernando behind him, I think, or with him, and he's been pushing hard to get him into the Alpine because of Fernando's connection with Flavio. And yet they've signed Jack Doohan. So, I think a great decision, to be honest, because I think Jack deserves that opportunity. And he's a real charger. He's a real reflexy oversteer charger driver who will do exactly what Oscar Piastri did at the second chicane, given any chance of Esteban Ocon Mark II, probably. In that sense.
There'll be some new blood on the grid next year.
Yeah, there will be some new blood, and there's too many good young drivers standing around doing nothing, as I've said a million times, and that's shame on the Formula One teams. And I was only thinking the other day about, well, actually last night, Alex Palou, how well he's still going in IndyCar and how talented he is, a young Spanish driver, and well, not so young anymore, I guess. But he was there for all the Formula One teams to see, driving for Campos in Formula 3. Nobody took any interest, went over to America, made his mark, and there he is. And there's been, I know Zach's tried to get him and a few others, but, why weren't they getting talents like that when they were available? They weren't, because they're blinkered, most of them. And then they go down the academy route. And a lot of the drivers go to the academy route are self-funding their presence to have the coloured overalls in the car of the Formula One team. But does it actually open doors financially for them? That's the big question. Meanwhile, Leo Finoli, who's won the Formula 3 championship, said he's already got his deal done for next year. I presume it's F2. Good luck to him. Get on with it. No academy deal. That's why he's doing so well. Didn't win a race all year.
Wow.
But won the championship. Good on him.
That's crazy. Counterintuitive. And I'm glad that you shouted out Colapinto, because he, in my humble opinion, if meritocracy and competence is a thing in Formula One, then his should have been the story over Andrea Kimi Antonelli, right? But this is...
Well, not about over it. I mean, it's a big thing when George Russell's car's being driven by a young Italian at Monza in FP1, isn't it? I mean, I really felt sorry for George. And it's one thing to have your car driven by somebody else. It's another thing to see that car in the barrier after 10 minutes, and then to be sitting around at the beginning of FP2 waiting for the job to be done.
Great.
That's not good operation. And Mercedes arguably compromised their entire weekend because, George did qualify really well in the end, but did they have all the data they should have had on that car? And anyway, I mean, the Oscar Piastri thing kind of put an end to his chance anyway, didn't it?
Yeah,
what actually happened there? I didn't actually see it, Cameron. Maybe you can tell me. Did Oscar force him off, or did George sort of start to go too far to the left anyway before Oscar moved left going into turn one?
It was. It felt a lot like a rerun of George on Alonso in Australia this season. In that I think George had baked in a braking point, not accounting for the dirty air that was coming off the back of Oscar's car, right? So Oscar moved. Oscar was doing the Oscar thing, trying to get his entry, trying to widen the geometric racing line into turn 1, turn 2, and then came in front of George. And George is like, "Hang on, I've got braking room here for me, myself, and I." So it was either get out the way and go in the runoff area, or tag Oscar in his gearbox.
So if Oscar hadn't moved left, there wouldn't have been an incident, is what we're saying.
No. Yeah.
So ultimately, it was Oscar's problem.
I don't know. I'd love to put it on Oscar. I think Oscar at that point is only dealing. I mean, I'd love to say that he had racing room and time sufficient to have a look in his rear view, but I don't think he's been.
But isn't it fair to say that on the first corner of any Grand Prix, if you are traveling in a straight line and going to brake and then thinking of moving left, some little voice in your head would say, this is the first corner. Almost certainly there's going to be a car on my outside because I'm not on the full extremity of the road. Isn't that what?
But George wasn't on Oscar's outside yet. George was
he was behind him, wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. He was directly behind him.
So George, fair enough. I get the point now. Yeah.
George just took the...
So 50-50, which is why there was no steward's inquiry.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, George just took the evasive action. You've been super generous with your time as always, Mr. Windsor, as we round third base.
Well, time has flown.
I know, mate. It's been quick, eh? Time is... I mean, when you're having fun talking about the cacophony of errors that was McLaren, it goes by very quickly. Let me ask you this final question, because you mentioned George Russell. And I've been, I'm not the biggest George Russell fan, if I'm honest with you. He's a brilliant driver, but I feel like he's quite a divisive character, his personality and whatever. However, as far as his future, he was wasted a couple of years of his career at Williams and even Toto confessed to this over the course of the weekend, that he should have brought him through earlier. He's been touted as the next one, as the replacement for Lewis Hamilton, the one that's going to take Mercedes, the Silver Arrows team, back to the top of the mountain and win them silverware and do what Lewis did for them back in 2014. Now, however, every time that Toto's asked the question on his driver pairing, there's two names that come out of his mouth. Andrea Kimi Antonelli is the priority, the next one, fixing for the errors of Christmas past, in that he didn't sign Max Verstappen when he had the opportunity. And the second name that comes out of his mouth is Maximilian Verstappen. How must George feel, Peter, knowing that he's got a contract that comes to an end at the end of 2025 and his team principal / mentor is only talking about two other drivers that aren't named George Russell? How must he be what must he be thinking and feeling?
Well, I think right now he's feeling pretty relaxed because his new teammate put the car in the wall after 10 minutes of FP1. So that makes you feel pretty good, doesn't it, in terms of the future and any challenge you might have from him. And I think George, knowing George, and I do like George a lot and a lot of respect for him as a racing driver. I think George is thinking, I'm thinking of 2025. If they give me a good car, I can win a championship for sure. And I can win Grand Prix. And I think he's right. I think he can. And I don't think it's up to George to take Mercedes back to the glory years. It's up to Mercedes to give George the car to take them back to the glory years. So that's that. And I think even Mercedes probably, even though the Antonelli thing looked really dodgy at Monza, even they have the brains and the management to understand that. I think George, like everybody else, is thinking, and I can't think beyond 25 because 26 is a complete unknown, complete question mark. We may have the greatest power unit on the planet. We may not. We may have a great car. We may have the worst car. Who knows? Anything can happen in 26. It's new regulations. And if they want to replace me with Max Verstappen and have Max Antonelli, I'll be able to get a drive somewhere else. I'm not that worried. I'm not that fussed. And I think he's right to think that way. And I'm assuming Toto's thinking, if I've got Max, if I can get Max, I've got to have Antonelli because Max Russell would be an incredibly volatile, difficult thing to run. And I can't imagine Max would want Russell anyway in the car. And I'm assuming that's the case. But I don't think George would be worried. And I think he'd be quite confident that he'd be able to get a decent drive somewhere else. But then again, as I keep making the point, it's not really 26 that's the issue. It's 27 because nobody knows what's going to happen in 26. Even on January the 1st, 26. Yeah, so yeah, it'll all, the big thing everybody should be talking about is mid 26. What is going to happen mid 26? And we don't know because we don't know what the pecking order is going to be at that point. But once we know, once it's March 26 and we know who's got a quick car and who hasn't, that's when the driver market is going to explode, in my opinion. And George would be well advised if his contract expires at the end of 25, be well advised to sign a 1-year deal for 26 on the basis that if the Mercedes is a bad car, he can switch to a Ferrari or something else.
Wow. Wow. Inspired, Mr. Windsor.
Well, it's not inspired. It's just logical. I mean, I don't know why everybody keeps talking about 26 or even Toto's talking about 26 because, who knows what's going to happen in 26? Why would Max leave Red Bull before he knows what the 26 Red Bull's going to be like?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why would he? He might leave at the end of 26 if it's a terrible car and go to Mercedes, whoever's got the best team, as I've said before. But why would he do that before? It doesn't make any sense to me. Yeah. I mean, maybe if they offer him €1 billion or something, maybe he would do it, but I don't know.
Gambling unnecessarily, and Max Verstappen.
Well, yeah, and if you're Mercedes and you've got George Russell and Antonelli, it's a pretty good lineup. You don't need then suddenly to think, we're never going to win with those two. We've got to have Max Verstappen, even if we got a great car. I mean, it doesn't make sense. You've got to have a good car. And if you've got a good car, George Russell will win with it. Thank you very much. End of story. Oh, of course he will. He's very, very good, George Russell. Don't ever underrate George.
He's not a bad peddler, is he?
Oh, he's super, super quick. And I think he's right up there with some of the quickest drivers of all time. I really do. I think he's an amazing racing driver. And I think he's a really good team player and a really good articulate person as well. So he's very valuable to Mercedes, and I hope they value him. I'm sure they do. I don't want to in any way sound condescending, but I hope they do. If they're thinking constantly, we've got to get somebody better, then they really need their heads examined.
As far as I think they do behind closed doors. But again, George will be reading all of this stuff. He might even be listening to this conversation. Pete, I'm conscious that drivers pay attention to what the media is saying. And every single time I've heard Toto Wolff over the past 3 or 4 months talk about his future driver lineup, the priorities, first order ones, have been Antonelli and Max Verstappen. It's almost like, hang on, who's this George Russell?
What he's effectively saying then is, I want 2 short corner drivers. I don't want a long corner driver like George.
Wow.
Why would he say that?
Yeah,
don't you want the one? You want one of one style and one of the other, don't you? Isn't that the perfect combination? As Mercedes have kind of got with George and Lewis now. That's what you want. You don't want 2 drivers doing exactly the same thing. Yeah. You're exploiting the car in all dimensions then.
Diversify.
So why would he want 2 short corner drivers? I don't get that at all.
Diversify your portfolio.
He may think Max is a better driver than George in 5 boxes. He ticks 3, which George doesn't, maybe. But you're talking you're talking tiny detail compared with the difference between having a very good Grand Prix car and a pretty mediocre
Mm,
Grand Prix car.
mm,
That's much more
yeah,
important.
yeah.
And Toto shouldn't be talking about drivers, in my opinion. He should be talking about engineers and why he failed to get Adrian Newey and what he's going to do about that.
Wow, wow.
Isn't that more important? Why Mercedes haven't had the pulling power to attract Adrian Newey is much more of a story, much bigger and much more important an issue than Antonelli or Lewis or George or Max. All those things, they're all quick drivers, but they're not the solution to the problem.
Yeah, no, don't disagree, Mr. Windsor. Finally, mate, I can't let you go without asking you this. Several months ago, when it was announced that Adrian Newey was going to leave Red Bull, the noises coming out from the Bulls that were red were to this effect: that we have a team of aerodynamicists such that they can function independently of Adrian Newey when he leaves, and that when he leaves, we won't necessarily see any material downside as far as lap time. To which, Mr. Windsor, if you remember, you responded, absolute nonsense. Of course, when you lose Adrian Newey, at some point, you're going to see some downside in performance. Revisit that for me, Peter. How do you take in, against the backdrop of that RB20 and its performance drop off, how do you ingest Adrian Newey's leaving now?
Well, I think it has had an effect already, and I think it's a reminder that Adrian is much more than an aerodynamicist, and that's where, if that quote from Red Bull's management is probably out of context, but just taking it on face value, of course they would say that anyway, wouldn't they? No team would allow themselves today, from PR marketing point of view, to say, "Oh, it's a terrible loss for us. We're going to be in big trouble." They'd never say that. So it's pointless asking them about it in the first place, in my opinion. But just to go back to the point, Adrian has always been much more than an aerodynamicist. For a start, he can design a car from front to rear. Secondly, he's as good on the pit wall and running a car over a weekend with a clipboard in his hand and making decisions in debriefs about setup than he is about grafting away in a wind tunnel and trying to create logical improvements for the car and the floor area. He's a race engineer. He's a racer, bottom line. He loves to be in the field, in a pit lane, as much as he loves thinking in the back seat of the car when he's being driven to Red Bull about the bouncing problem that they may or may not have. And that's a reminder, I think, of how big a role Adrian has played at Red Bull, and how what we're seeing now with Red Bull finding it more difficult to set the car up to get some sort of proper balance and setup for the race weekend is starting to slip away from them. Now that may change, and they do have, as I've said, for a long time, they have a lot of building blocks in all areas of the operation of the team, whether it be manufacturing, whether it be design, development, or whether it be operating the car. And of course, they have some very, very good engineers there with a massive amount of experience, and they will certainly get a number of the remaining races right in terms of setup, maximizing the car for what it can do, and for sure they'll win races before the end of the year again. But it's just a reminder of how good Adrian is and was, and potentially still will be in the future, as an all-round engineer, as a race engineer, as an aerodynamicist, and as an overall design engineer.
He's not bad, is he, Mr. New? One
Well,
of the
he's
best
very
to
good.
ever
I mean,
do.
the only thing about Adrian is, like all of us, he's getting a little bit older with
Mm.
every passing year, just a little bit. And that needs to be borne in mind. Give the guy a break. In some respects, he's earned a holiday, I think. But
Yeah, yeah, just a bit.
I can't see as a slot for him at McLaren. I can't see after Monza, if the Ferrari option's still there and he hasn't taken it up or not taken it up definitively, Ferrari would be thinking even more, why do we need to rock the boat?
Yeah.
So it does look as if it's going to be the dreaded, Lawrence Stroll route.
Oh no, what are we
So,
doing here?
kind of, it's a bit like Michael coming out of retirement and going to Mercedes, isn't it? It's like, is that
Yeah,
really what you want to do?
it doesn't sit
I'd
very
much
well.
rather see Adrian racing a Lotus 49B around some Zandvoort and Monaco,
Oh,
some of these classic Formula One cars, and just being relaxed. But anyway, if he
yeah.
wants to get into that whole vortex of the Stroll thing, then good luck to him again.
Wow, so be it. Fair play. And if anybody can turn around that
But
sinking
weren't they
ship,
terrible? Weren't they absolutely
mate,
terrible at Monza? I mean,
unbelievable.
it's amazing, isn't it, how they get away with it when they have a terrible weekend. nobody's on their case at all, it seems. When they have a great weekend, they're all raving about Aston and Fernando and everything else. And then they have a dread. I mean, it's like I was watching a lot of the Spanish footage on DAZN, and it's still very Fernando centric, even though
Oh
he's
yeah,
droning around, under pressure from Colapinto or something.
yeah.
It's
They love
getting
him.
beaten by Albon. They're still, oh yeah, Fernando's totally brilliant, mega.
Yeah.
Well, he is. He's totally mega and brilliant. But what is going on there?
I know Lobato loves him, doesn't he? Always calling him Magic. It is a very Fernando Alonso centric broadcast, Stephen.
I don't know about that, but I do know that Fernando's very, very good in race situations, and Aston Martin are not allowing that brilliance to show through at the moment. That's for sure.
Yeah, sadly. Just lastly on Newey, before I let you go, Mr. Windsor.
Yeah.
They said on the broadcast, I feel like they've stolen another line, one of your most famous lines. I think you said about Adrian Newey that his gift isn't just in the ability to design cars, but it's because he has an experience as a race engineer with Damon Hill back in the day. The Leighton House March 881 day, like, because his experience is so wide ranging, he has that ability not necessarily to just build the car and come up with a philosophy, but to take a step back when necessary, which is what Red Bull need at the moment, and troubleshoot for some of their issues with a view to right the ship. Is that what they're missing out on at the moment, Peter? That Adrian Newey ability.
As I said before, I think that is the point. I think they're missing Adrian's presence on the pit wall with a clipboard, making notes and, dampers, springs, whatever it be, Ackerman, toe in camber. All the things that Adrian loves doing as well, as a race engineer. And it's not just those two. I mean, he started life effectively as Christian Danner's race engineer at March. And concurrently, he was interested in design. But what he wanted to do was engineer race cars. And then he went to Indy doing exactly the same thing. So he's a race engineer who's also a brilliant aerodynamicist, who's also a chief designer. That's what Adrian Newey is. He's also a pretty good racing driver as well, actually, or fast racing driver. So, he's a multitude of things. And right now, I'd say Red Bull would definitely benefit if Adrian was in the normal position and sitting there, giving advice. Wouldn't it be wonderful if, as we were speaking now, Cam, the phone was ringing on Christian Horner's desk and it was Adrian saying, Christian, I want to come back. I want to be just where we were. This is all nonsense. I don't want to work for that guy. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I just want to be where we were. I know you need a little bit of help with the car right now. I know exactly what to do to fix it. So come on, I'll be there tomorrow. See you. Let's have a croissant.
Wow.
Wouldn't it be great if that was happening?
Eddie Jordan cracked a joke to that effect not long ago on the podcast that he runs with David Coulthard, Mr. Windsor. I think let's play this tape back in a couple of months, Peter. I wouldn't be. It's not the most likely outcome, but
it's not the most likely outcome because Formula One's got a very good habit of not allowing round pegs to sit in round holes. So we've got to assume it won't happen, and we've got to look for the squarest possible hole for the roundest possible peg, and assume that'll happen. And that's probably Aston Martin, sadly.
Yeah. Oh dear. Mr. Windsor, it's been a pleasure. You've been super generous with your time as always. Thank you so much. If you enjoy this soliloquy from Peter D. Windsor, then go and check him out on the YouTubes, one of the goatiest YouTube channels to ever have YouTube, the Peter D. Windsor YouTube channel, talking about all things Formula One, insight, driver technique, et al. It's spectacular. If you're not satisfied with that and you prefer to ingest your F1 content on a podcasting platform, go and check out the Short Corners podcast, where you can get more market leading soliloquy, story, insight from the legend that is the F1 broadcasting goat that is Peter D. Windsor. If you're watching this on the YouTubes, do me a favor.
Cameron, stop. You can do that anything. I just want to stop you now because I just wanted to say that I did a very short YouTube video in which it was an extract from a live stream, which I'm talking about Elio De Angelis and Keke Rosberg. And in the description, there's a link to the Italian version of that, in which I do it in Italian, soliloquy in Italian. So I wanted to mention that. And I might be doing some more foreign language ones as well. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Look at that, Peter. No, you can't just drop that bombshell, Peter. Is that Peter D. Windsor's voice in Italian, or do you have somebody
Peter D. Windsor's voice in Italian. And
I did not know you were an Italian speaker, Peter.
Well, there you go. It's a link. You won't see it if you just look at the channel, but if you click on that link, it'll open up a different video in which I'm doing the whole video in Italian, the same video for Italian viewers, obviously.
Wow. I don't even know what to say after that. That's
Well, you can say your ending. Or you want us to get your ending because you're always too nice in the ending.
It has to be done. Listen, if you're watching this on a YouTube, then do me a favor, like, comment, and share. If you're listening on a podcasting platform, then as always, 5 stars and a cheeky follow. That has been the legend that is Peter D. Windsor. I've as always been Cameron F1. Between now and next time, as always, remember to look but never stare.